The dust that settled on Helena Zimmerman's apron each afternoon was as predictable as the men who never looked her way when they passed through the doors of the Concordia General Store in Kansas. And she had long since stopped expecting anything different from either. She was 23 years old in the summer of 1878, plain-faced according to the mirror and the silence of suitors, with mousy brown hair that refused to hold a curl, and a figure that disappeared beneath the practical dresses she wore 6 days a week. The store belonged to her father, though consumption had taken him 2 winters back, and now it belonged to her brother who drank more than he sold, which meant it really belonged to Helena, who kept the books, minded the counter, and made sure the shelves stayed stocked even when credit ran thin. The bell above the door chimed on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday, and Helena glanced up from the ledger where she was tallying the week's disappointing numbers. 3 men walked in trailing dust, and the smell of horses, ranch hands from the double bar spread west of town, and they headed straight for the tobacco without so much as a nod in her direction. She was furniture to most folks, as permanent and unremarkable as the pickle barrel or the pot-bellied stove, and she had made her peace with it the way a person makes peace with a limp or a scar. "Miss Zimmerman." The voice came from near the door, and she looked up to find Marshall Tate regarding her with his usual expression of mild concern, as though she were a problem he had not quite figured out how to solve. "Your brother around, sleeping it off in the back." Helena did not bother softening the truth. Everyone in Concordia knew what Thomas was, right? The marshal shifted his weight, his boots creaking. "Well, I wanted to let you know there is a new fellow in town, hired on at the double bar. Name is Maddox Hayes. Seems respectable enough, but keep your eyes open. Strange things have been happening at some of the ranches north of here." Helena nodded, though she doubted any trouble would find its way into her store that was not already drinking itself to death in the back room. The marshal tipped his hat and left, and the ranch hands followed soon after with their tobacco and their loud voices, and the store fell back into its familiar quiet. She was closing up that evening, pulling the shades and locking the cash box, when she heard the sound of a horse outside. The light was going golden and long, painting Concordia's Main Street in shades of amber, and when she peered through the window, she saw a man dismounting from a tall bay gelding. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it, his hat pulled low, his shoulders broad beneath a dusty shirt. He tied the horse to the rail and turned toward the store, and Helena quickly stepped back from the window, her heart doing something foolish in her chest. The bell chimed. The man pulled off his hat as he entered, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. He was perhaps 27 or 28, weathered in the way of men who worked outside, with a jaw that might have been carved from the same stone as the Kansas bluffs. "I apologize for the hour." His voice was low and courteous. "I know you are likely closing, but I am in need of a few supplies. Just started at the double bar and the bunkhouse is lacking in the basics." Helena found her voice somewhere beneath her surprise. "It is no trouble. What do you need? Soap if you have it, coffee. Maybe some writing paper and a pen." He glanced around the store with the assessing eye of someone taking measure. "And I heard in town that you sell books sometimes." "I have a few." She moved toward the shelf where she kept her small collection, most of them traded from travelers or ordered special from Kansas City when the budget allowed. Nothing fancy. Some dime novels, a collection of Whitman's poems, a Shakespeare volume. Whitman would do just fine. He followed her to the shelf, standing close enough that she could smell horse and leather and plain soap. "I am Maddox Hayes. Most folks call me Maddox. Helena Zimmerman." She pulled the Whitman from the shelf and handed it to him, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I run the store." "So I gathered." He smiled, and it changed his whole face, warming it like sun on winter ground. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Zimmerman." She gathered the rest of his supplies while he browsed the shelves, and when he came to the counter, he paid in cash, counting out the coins with careful attention. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who knew work, and she found herself wondering about him in a way she had not wondered about anyone in a long time. "The marshal mentioned you were new to town." She wrapped the soap in brown paper, needing something to do with her hands. "Where are you from?" "Most recently Colorado. Before that, a bit of everywhere." He tucked the Whitman into his saddlebag along with the other supplies. "I have been working ranches since I was 16. Figured it was time to find a place that might stick." "Concordia is quiet," Helena said, which was the most diplomatic way she could think to describe a town that felt half asleep most days. "But the land is good, and the people are decent enough. Quiet sounds fine to me." Maddox settled his hat back on his head. "Thank you for staying open, Miss Zimmerman. I expect I will see you again soon." He left with a touch to his hat brim, and Helena stood behind the counter long after the sound of his horse had faded, feeling something she could not quite name stirring in the careful stillness she had built around her life. The days that followed fell into their usual rhythm, except now there was Maddox Hayes riding into town twice a week, always stopping at the general store, always courteous and unhurried. He would buy his supplies and sometimes stay to talk, leaning against the counter while Helena worked, asking her about the town and the people in it, about the books she read and the garden she kept behind the store. He treated her like someone worth talking to, worth listening to, and it unsettled her in ways she did not know how to manage. "He is sweet on you," said Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house and knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. She had come in for thread and was watching Helena with the shrewd eyes of a woman who missed nothing. "That new cowboy, I have seen the way he looks at you." Helena felt heat rise in her face. "He is just friendly." "Friendly is one thing, what he is doing is another." Mrs. Patterson selected her thread with care. "You could do worse, Helena. He seems like a good man, and Lord knows you have earned some happiness after what you have been through." After Mrs. Patterson left, Helena stood in the empty store and let herself imagine it for just a moment, what it might be like to be someone a man like Maddox Hayes looked at with intention. But the mirror behind the counter showed her the same plain face it always had, and she pushed the thought away before it could take root and cause her pain. That Saturday, Concordia held a dance in the community hall, one of the quarterly socials that brought folks in from the surrounding ranches. Helena had not planned to go. She never did. But her friend Mary Brennan showed up at the store just before closing with a determined look on her face. "You are coming tonight," Mary announced, sweeping in with her usual energy. She was everything Helena was not, pretty and vivacious with blonde curls and a laugh that turned heads. "I will not take no for an answer. You spend too much time in this store. Someone has to mind it." Helena gestured at the ledger, at the dozen tasks that needed doing. "Thomas can mind it for one evening, or it can mind itself." Mary came around the counter and took Helena's hands. "Please, come with me. We will have fun, I promise." Helena had never been able to refuse Mary, who had been her friend since childhood and had never treated her as invisible. So she found herself that evening in her best dress, which was still plain but at least clean and pressed, walking toward the community hall with her heart beating too fast in her chest. The hall was already crowded when they arrived, full of music and laughter and the stamp of dancing feet. The fiddler was in fine form, and couples whirled across the floor while others clustered along the walls, talking and drinking punch. Helena spotted Maddox almost immediately. He was taller than most and standing with a group of ranch hands near the far wall. He wore a clean shirt and had clearly made an effort to tame his hair. And when his gaze found hers across the room, something passed between them that made her breath catch. "He is coming over here," Mary whispered, squeezing Helena's arm. "I told you." Maddox crossed the hall with purposeful strides, weaving through the dancers, and when he reached them, he nodded to Mary before turning his full attention to Helena. "Miss Zimmerman, I was hoping you might be here tonight. Would you do me the honor of a dance?" The room seemed to tilt slightly. Helena was aware of people watching, of Mary's encouraging smile, of the music swelling into a waltz. "I am not much of a dancer. Neither am I, so we will muddle through together." He offered his hand, and she took it before she could talk herself out of it. He led her onto the floor and pulled her into the waltz with a gentle confidence that suggested he had been lying about his dancing skills. His hand was warm on her waist, and she could feel the strength in him, controlled and careful. They moved together through the steps, and Helena forgot about the people watching, forgot about everything except the feeling of being held and led and treated as though she mattered. "You look lovely tonight," Maddox said, and there was nothing practiced in the compliment, nothing smooth or calculated. He said it like a simple fact. "You do not have to say things like that." The words came out more sharply than she intended, his brow furrowed. "I would not say it if I did not mean it." She looked up at him then, searching his face for mockery or pity, but found only honest regard. It frightened her more than any insult could have. "Why are you doing this? Dancing with you, talking to me, coming to the store, asking me to dance?" "I know what I am, Maddox. I know what people see when they look at me. You could have your pick of the girls in this room." The music swirled around them, and Maddox was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" She wanted to say no, wanted to pull away and run from the hall and hide in the safety of her store where she understood the rules and her place in them. But she stayed silent, and he took it as permission. "I see someone who keeps a business running through sheer determination. Someone who is kind to every person who walks through that door, even the ones who do not deserve it. Someone who reads poetry and tends a garden and never complains about a situation that would break most people." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "I see someone I want to know better, if you will let me." The waltz ended, and they stood there in the middle of the floor while couples moved around them and the fiddler struck up a new tune. Helena felt something cracking open inside her, something she had kept locked away for so long she had forgotten it was there. "I am afraid," she whispered, "of me, of this, of believing it might be real." Maddox lifted her hand and held it between both of his, and the gesture was so tender it made her throat ache. "It is real, Helena, as real as anything I have ever felt, and I will prove it to you if you give me the chance." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and they danced 2 more dances before Mary pulled her aside with shining eyes and demands to know everything. But there was not much to tell, not yet, just the feeling of possibility opening up like a flower after rain. The summer deepened, and with it grew the understanding between Helena and Maddox. He came to town 3 times a week now, always finding reasons to stop at the store, and on Sundays after church he would walk with her through the dusty streets of Concordia, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Missouri with a father who drank and a mother who died too young, about learning ranch work from a kind foreman who saw potential in an angry kid. She told him about her own mother's death, about taking on the store when her father got sick, about Thomas and his demons that came out of a bottle. "You could leave," Maddox said one Sunday as they sat by the creek south of town, watching the water slide over smooth stones. Sell the store, start fresh somewhere else. And do what? I have no other skills, no money of my own. Helena trailed her fingers through the creek water. Besides, it was my father's store. I feel like I owe it to him to keep it going, even if it is killing you slowly. She looked at him, at the concern written clear on his face, and felt that dangerous warmth spreading through her again. It is the life I have. It does not have to be the only life you have. He moved closer, and she could see the pulse beating in his throat. Helena, I need you to know something. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the first day I walked into your store. The words hung in the air between them, bright and terrifying and more precious than anything she had ever been given. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out, and Maddox reached for her hand. You do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that this is not some passing fancy. I want a future with you if you will have me. I am not the kind of woman men build futures with. Her voice was barely a whisper. I am plain and poor, and my family is a mess. You are beautiful and strong and the best person I have ever known. He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him, and I do not care about the rest. She kissed him then, leaning in quickly before she could lose her courage, and his arms came around her like they had been waiting for permission. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as Helena let herself fall into it, into him, into the possibility of being loved. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Maddox rested his forehead against hers. Tell me you feel this too, he said. Tell me I am not alone in it. You are not alone. Helena's hands were shaking as she touched his face. I love you. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me. He laughed then, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her back into his arms. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking about the future in careful terms, testing the shape of dreams they had not let themselves dream before. Maddox wanted to save enough to buy his own land, maybe start a small ranch. Helena wanted a real home, something more than the cramped rooms behind the store. Together, they began to sketch the outline of a life that included both those things. But Concordia was a small town, and small towns had a way of resenting happiness that bloomed outside their expectations. Helena began to notice the looks when she and Maddox walked together, the whispers that followed them. Most of it was harmless gossip, the natural curiosity about a courtship, but some of it had edges. I heard Margaret Summers say you trapped him somehow, Mary reported one afternoon, her face flushed with indignation. Can you imagine? As if any woman could trap Maddox Hayes. He is clearly devoted to you. Helena felt the familiar weight settling back onto her shoulders. Maybe she is right. Maybe I should let him go before he realizes he could do better. Do not you dare. Mary gripped her arm. That man loves you, Helena. Anyone with eyes can see it. Do not let petty people steal your happiness. But the whispers got worse when Maddox announced his intention to marry Helena that fall. Suddenly, women who had never given her a second thought had opinions about the match. She was too plain for him. She was marrying above her station. He would regret it once the novelty wore off. The words found their way to Helena's ears, the way cruel words always did, and each one was a small cut that bled doubt. Thomas was no help. He had grown increasingly resentful of Maddox's presence, seeing it somehow as a judgment on his own failures. The night Maddox formally asked for Helena's hand, Thomas was drunk and mean. You think you are better than this family now? He sneered from his chair in the back room. Think you are going to ride off with your cowboy and forget about the store, forget about me? I have never forgotten about you, Thomas. I have held this family together for years. Helena's patience, worn thin by months of carrying him, finally snapped. But I will not give up my one chance at happiness because you are determined to drink yourself to death. That is what he is offering you. Happiness. Thomas laughed, ugly and bitter. He will leave you, Helena, soon as he figures out what everyone already knows. You are not worth the trouble. The words hit exactly where he intended, finding the soft, vulnerable place where Helena's worst fears lived. She left the store and walked blindly through the dark streets until she found herself at the livery stable where Maddox was tending his horse. He took one look at her face and pulled her into an empty stall, holding her while she cried against his chest. "Tell me what happened." His voice was tight with anger and she could feel the tension in his body. She told him everything, Thomas's words spilling out between sobs, and when she finished, Maddox was quiet for a long moment. "Look at me." He tipped her face up, his thumb wiping away her tears. "Nothing your brother said is true. You hear me? Nothing. You are worth everything, Helena. You are worth the sun and the moon and every star in the sky. How can you be so sure?" Her voice broke on the question. "Everyone else sees something different. Everyone else is not paying attention." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips with infinite tenderness. "I see you, Helena, all of you, and I am not going anywhere." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of Concordia with Mary as witness and half the town in attendance. Helena wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Maddox wore a new suit that he had saved for. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Maddox kissed her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever prayed. The celebration afterward was held in the church hall, and for one afternoon Helena let herself believe in the fairy tale. She danced with her husband, accepted congratulations from neighbors, and tried not to see the skeptical looks that some people still wore. Thomas did not come, which was perhaps for the best, though his absence was its own kind of wound. Maddox had found them a small house on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but clean and solid, with a porch that faced west and a bedroom that caught the morning sun. He carried Helena across the threshold that evening while she laughed, and then they were alone together for the first time as husband and wife. "I am nervous," Helena admitted as Maddox set her down in the bedroom. "Is that foolish?" "Not foolish at all." He took off his jacket and hung it carefully over a chair. "I am nervous too." "You are." She had assumed his experience far outweighed hers, which was non-existent. "I want to do right by you." He came to her and began working the buttons of her dress with gentle fingers. "I want to make you happy." "You already make me happy." She touched his face, marveling that he was hers, that this was real and true. "I love you, Maddox. I love you too." He kissed her deeply, and Helena let herself fall into the warmth of it, let herself believe that maybe she had earned this, maybe she deserved to be loved. That night he was patient and kind, teaching her body the language of pleasure with hands that worshipped every inch of her. When they finally came together, Helena cried from the overwhelming tenderness of it, from the feeling of being seen and known and cherished. Afterward, Maddox held her close and whispered promises into her hair, and she fell asleep feeling safer than she had ever felt in her life. The early days of their marriage were sweeter than Helena had imagined possible. She still ran the store during the day, though Maddox helped when he could between his shifts at the double bar. In the evenings, they would return to their little house and cook simple meals together, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Maddox was saving every spare dollar toward buying land, and Helena had started setting aside money from the store profits, hiding it in a tin in the kitchen. "Another year, maybe 2, and we will have enough for a down payment," Maddox said one night as they lay in bed, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I have my eye on a section north of town. Good grazing land, a creek running through it. What about the store?" Helena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Thomas can have it, or you can sell it. Either way, you will be free of it." He kissed the top of her head. I want to build you a real home, Helena, something that is just ours. She turned in his arms to face him. I already have a real home. Anywhere you are is home. The words were true, but the reality was more complicated. The store still demanded most of her time, and Thomas had gotten worse since the wedding, showing up drunk and belligerent, driving away customers with his behavior. Helena tried to manage him, tried to keep the business running, but it was like trying to hold water in a sieve. Things came to a head on a Thursday afternoon when Thomas showed up at the store in a rage. He had lost money gambling and somehow decided it was Helena's fault for not giving him access to the store profits. "That money is mine by rights," he shouted, slamming his fist on the counter. "Our father left the store to me." "Our father left the store to both of us," Helena said, keeping her voice calm though her heart was racing. "And I have been running it while you drank away every dollar we made. Because you drove me to it. You with your judgments and your superior attitude." He grabbed her wrist hard enough to hurt. "You owe me, Helena. Let her go." The voice came from the doorway, cold as winter steel. Maddox stood there, his face set in lines Helena had never seen before. Right now. Thomas released her wrist and turned to face Maddox with a sneer. "The Golden Cowboy, come to rescue your wife from her own family. I've come to tell you that if you ever put your hands on her again, you will answer to me." Maddox moved into the store with the dangerous grace of a predator, and I will not be gentle about it. Big words from hired help. But Thomas took a step back, and Helena could see the fear beneath his bravado. "Get out." Maddox did not raise his voice, but the words carried weight. "Get out and do not come back unless you are sober and ready to apologize." Thomas left, cursing and stumbling, and Helena sank onto the stool behind the counter, shaking. Maddox came to her immediately, checking her wrist where red marks were already forming. "Did he hurt you anywhere else?" His voice was tight with controlled rage. "No, he has never done that before." Helena felt tears threatening. "Maddox, I am sorry. I should have handled it better. You have nothing to be sorry for." He pulled her into his arms. "But we need to talk about the store. This cannot continue." That night they had a long conversation about their future. Maddox wanted her to sell the store immediately, to wash her hands of it and Thomas both. Helena wanted to believe it was possible, but guilt held her back. "He is my brother," she said. "If I sell the store, what will he do? What he has been doing. Drinking and gambling and blaming everyone else for his problems." Maddox took her hands. "Helena, you cannot save him. Lord knows you have tried. But he is drowning, and if you are not careful, he will pull you down with him." She knew he was right, had known it for years, but letting go of the responsibility felt like betraying her father's memory. They went to bed without resolving it, and Helena lay awake long into the night, listening to Maddox breathe beside her and trying to figure out what the right answer was. The decision was made for her 2 weeks later when Thomas sold the store out from under her. He forged her signature on the deed and sold it to a merchant from Kansas City for less than half what it was worth, taking the money and disappearing before anyone realized what had happened. Helena found out when the new owner showed up with his papers and his plans to turn the general store into a freight office. She stood in the empty building that evening, looking at the shelves she had stocked and the counter she had polished and the ledgers she had kept so carefully, and felt a strange sense of relief beneath the anger and betrayal. It was done. The choice had been taken from her, and now she was free. Maddox found her there as the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He did not say anything, just pulled her into his arms and held her while she grieved for what was lost and what could never be recovered. "What do we do now?" she asked when she could speak again. "Now we build our own life." He kissed her temple. I talked to Mr. Henderson at the bank today. He said we have enough for a down payment on that land I showed you. We can start small, build it up slowly. You still want that, even though I come with nothing now. You never came with nothing. He pulled back to look at her. You came with everything that matters. The rest is just details. They bought the land in October, 80 acres of rolling Kansas prairie with good water and better grass. Maddox started building a cabin with help from the other ranch hands, and Helena began planning a garden that would be bigger and better than the small plot behind the store. They lived in a tent while the cabin went up, and Helena had never been happier, sleeping under the stars with her husband beside her, and their future stretching out like the endless sky. The cabin was small but solid, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and windows that faced the sunrise. Maddox carved their initials over the door before they moved in, MH and HH linked together, and Helena cried when she saw it because it was the first thing that had ever been truly hers. That winter was hard, colder than usual, with snow that piled in drifts against the cabin walls. But inside they were warm, burning wood that Maddox had cut and stacked, eating simple meals that Helena cooked on the fireplace, talking and reading and making love while the wind howled outside. They learned each other's rhythms, the small details of sharing a life, and Helena discovered that happiness was not a grand thing, but a collection of small moments that added up to something precious. Spring came late but glorious, and with it came the work of starting a ranch. Maddox bought 3 cows and a bull with money he had saved, and Helena planted her garden with seeds she had ordered from a catalog. They worked from dawn to dusk, building fences and breaking ground and learning how to coax life from the stubborn Kansas soil. On a warm evening in May, Helena realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body changing in subtle ways, but she waited to be certain before telling Maddox. That night after supper, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is someone you should know about," she said, watching his face. "Someone who will be joining us come winter." Understanding dawned slowly, and then Maddox was laughing and crying at once, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around the small cabin. "Truly, we are having a baby." Truly. She was laughing too, giddy with joy and terror. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He set her down carefully as though she had suddenly become fragile. "Helena Hayes, you have made me the richest man in Kansas." The pregnancy progressed through the summer and into fall, and Helena bloomed with it, her body rounding and her face taking on a glow that Maddox swore made her more beautiful every day. The women of Concordia, who had been so quick to judge her marriage, softened when they saw her condition, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and the kind of practical support that frontier communities excelled at. Mary was over the moon, already planning to be the baby's godmother and knitting tiny blankets in every color she could find. Even Mrs. Patterson stopped by with a basket of supplies and some tart words about taking care of herself. "That husband of yours is good for you," she said, watching Maddox tend the horses outside. "I have never seen you look so well." "He is the best man I have ever known," Helena said simply, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The baby came on a snowy night in January of 1880, arriving 3 weeks early and in a hurry. Maddox rode through the storm to fetch the midwife while Helena labored alone in the cabin, breathing through the contractions and trying not to be afraid. By the time Maddox returned with Mrs. Chen, the Chinese midwife who had delivered half the babies in the county, Helena was close to pushing. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Maddox stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and telling her, She was doing fine even when she screamed at him that she was most certainly not fine. Mrs. Chen was calm and efficient, coaching her through each contraction, and finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby came. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, holding up the squalling, red-faced infant. "Strong and healthy." Helena was crying and laughing as they placed him in her arms, this tiny perfect person she and Maddox had created. Maddox knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears, and touched their son's downy head with infinite gentleness. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He looks like you. He has your nose." Helena traced the small features, marveling. What should we name him? They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Maddox said, "William, after my grandfather. He was the one good man in my family. William Hayes." Helena tested the name. "It is perfect." Recovery was slow, and Maddox took on most of the ranch work while Helena focused on learning how to keep a tiny human alive. William was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in predictable stretches, but Helena was exhausted in ways she had not known were possible. Maddox would come in from working the cattle to find her asleep sitting up. William cradled against her chest, and he would carefully take the baby and let her rest. Those early months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless laundry, and the overwhelming love Helena felt every time she looked at her son. Maddox was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing William old cowboy songs and carrying him around the ranch while he worked. Watching them together made Helena's heart ache in the best way possible. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The cattle had calves, doubling their small herd. The garden came in strong, and Helena spent long days preserving vegetables for winter. William grew and changed daily, rolling over and then sitting up and then trying to crawl across the cabin floor. Life was hard but good, each day a testament to what they were building together. On a Sunday in June, they took William to church for the first time since his christening. Helena dressed him in a little gown Mary had made, and Maddox wore his suit, and they walked into Concordia as a family. People stopped to admire the baby, and Helena saw something in their faces that had not been there before, a kind of acceptance, an acknowledgement that she and Maddox had built something real and lasting. After church, they ran into Thomas on the main street. Helena had not seen him since he sold the store, though she had heard through the grapevine that he was working odd jobs and staying mostly sober. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were clear when they met hers. "Helena." He stopped in front of them, his hat in his hands. "I heard you had a baby. This is William." She shifted the baby in her arms, not sure what else to say. Thomas looked at his nephew for a long moment, something complicated passing over his face. "He is a fine-looking boy, takes after his mother." He glanced at Maddox, then back at Helena. "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I was wrong about everything. I stole from you and hurt you and tried to ruin your chance at happiness because I could not stand to see you succeed where I failed." Helena did not know what to say. She had imagined this moment, rehearsed different responses, but now that it was here, all she felt was tired. "I do not expect you to forgive me," Thomas continued. "I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I am trying to do better. I got a job at the lumber mill and I have been sober for 4 months now." "That is good, Thomas." Helena meant it. "I am glad you are getting your life together." "Yeah, well, seeing you happy made me realize what I was missing." He looked down at his boots. "You deserve it, Helena. Happiness." "I hope I did not ruin that for you." "You did not." She surprised herself by reaching out and touching his arm. "We are all right, better than all right." They parted ways after that, and Helena did not know if she would see Thomas again, or if this was a one-time moment of clarity before he fell back into his old patterns. But she found that she did not need to know. She had let go of the responsibility for fixing him, and it felt like setting down a weight she had carried for too long. The years that followed were full and rich. Maddox built their ranch slowly and carefully, never overextending, always planning for the long term. Helena raised William and then his sister Margaret, who came 2 years later, a red-faced screaming bundle who grew into a sweet-tempered toddler. The ranch prospered, and they were able to hire help, which gave Maddox more time with the family and Helena more time for the things she loved, her garden and her reading and the small community of women who had become her friends. On their 5th anniversary, Maddox surprised her with a trip to Kansas City. It was the first time Helena had left Concordia since her wedding, and she felt like a country mouse in the big city with its paved streets and tall buildings and stores that sold things she had never imagined. Maddox bought her a real silk dress and took her to a restaurant with white tablecloths and courses that kept coming long after she thought the meal must be over. "This is too much," she protested, though she was smiling. "Nothing is too much for you." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you know what today is besides our anniversary?" "Thursday," he laughed. "Yes, but also the day I decided to walk into that general store 5 years ago. I almost did not, you know. I was tired and dusty and figured I could wait until morning. But something made me go in, and there you were behind that counter, and my whole life changed." Helena felt tears prickling. "My life changed too. I did not think I could be happy, Maddox. I had given up on it, and then you saw me. I will always see you." He lifted her hand and kissed it. "You are impossible to overlook, Helena Hayes. You are the sun and the moon and every star." That night in their hotel room, he made love to her slowly and thoroughly, and Helena thought about how far they had come from that first nervous night in their little house on the edge of Concordia. They knew each other now, every scar and secret, every fear and dream, and the knowing made everything deeper and sweeter. They returned home to find that William had given Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching the children, a proper run for her money, and Margaret had learned a new word which she repeated at enthusiastic volume. The house was chaos and noise, and exactly where Helena wanted to be. More years passed in the swift way of happy years. William started school in Concordia, riding into town each day on the pony Maddox had trained for him. Margaret followed 2 years later, solemn and studious, where her brother was wild and rambunctious. The ranch continued to grow, and Maddox's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman spread throughout the county. Helena started teaching reading to some of the ranch children whose families lived too far from town for regular school. She would gather them in the cabin twice a week, 5 or 6 kids of various ages, and work through primers and simple books, watching their faces light up as words became stories. It reminded her of the best parts of running the store, the sense of being useful and needed, but without the weight of responsibility that had crushed her before. On a spring morning in 1887, Maddox came in from checking the cattle with news. "The Henderson place is for sale. 40 acres right next to our property line." Helena looked up from helping Margaret with her letters. "Can we afford it? If we are careful, it would give us room to expand the herd, maybe build a proper barn." He sat down at the table, his eyes bright with possibility. "What do you think?" She thought about the tent they had lived in while building their first cabin, about the years of hard work and careful saving, about the life they had built from nothing. "I think we should do it." They bought the Henderson place, and with it became one of the larger landholders in the county. It was strange sometimes for Helena to think about, how she had gone from being the overlooked girl running a failing store to being Mrs. Hayes of the Double H Ranch. But she never forgot where she came from, never lost the humility that hardship had taught her. Thomas came around occasionally, always sober, always respectful. He had married a widow named Sarah and was helping raise her 3 children, working steady at the mill and building a quiet, respectable life. Helena was glad for him, though they would never be close the way siblings should be. Too much had happened, too much hurt that could not be fully undone. But they had made their peace, and that was enough. On Helena's 30th birthday, Maddox threw a party that brought half the county to their ranch. Long tables were set up under the cottonwood trees, laden with food that everyone had contributed. There was music and dancing and children running wild through the fields. Helena stood on the porch of their cabin, watching it all, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Mary came to stand beside her, carrying her own baby on her hip. She had married a banker from Kansas City and moved back to Concordia the year before, declaring that city life was not for her. "Look at you," she said. "The belle of the ball," Helena laughed. "Hardly that. I do not know. You have a husband who looks at you like you hung the moon, 2 beautiful children, a successful ranch. Seems like belle of the ball territory to me." Mary squeezed her arm. "I am proud of you, for building this life, for not giving up." "I almost did give up," Helena admitted. "Before Maddox, I thought my life was set and it was small and hard and that was all I deserved. But you were wrong, so wrong." Helena watched Maddox swing William up onto his shoulders while Margaret danced around them. "I did not know life could be like this." The party lasted until well after dark, and when the last guests had finally left, Helena and Maddox sat on the porch steps, tired and happy. The children were asleep inside, worn out from excitement, and the night was soft with cricket song and the smell of prairie grass. 30 years old, Maddox said, pulling Helena close. "How does it feel? Like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Like everything that came before was leading me here, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. They taught me to recognize the good when it came." She turned to look at him. "They taught me to recognize you." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, and Helena thought about the girl she had been, standing behind that counter, invisible to everyone who passed through. That girl would not have believed this future, would not have dared to dream so big. But she had been braver than she knew, strong enough to survive until the right person came along and saw her. More years rolled by, bringing changes and challenges. William grew into a tall young man who loved the ranch and had a natural way with horses. Margaret developed a passion for learning that led her to talk about becoming a teacher. The ranch continued to prosper, weathering droughts and hard winters through Maddox's careful management and Helena's steadying presence. They added onto the cabin, building a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a parlor and a kitchen big enough for Helena to cook the large meals required by a working ranch. They hired more hands and took in a young orphan named Sam who had been sleeping in the livery stable, giving him work and a place to belong through it all. Helena and Maddox's love deepened and matured, growing roots that went down to bedrock. They had their disagreements, moments of tension and frustration, but they had learned how to fight fair and forgive fully. They knew each other's wounds and weaknesses, and they handled them with care. On their 15th anniversary, Helena woke to find Maddox already up and dressed. "Get ready," he said when he saw her stirring. "We are going somewhere." "Where?" But he just smiled and told her to put on her riding clothes. They rode out across the ranch, leaving the house behind, heading north toward the section of land where they had first talked about building their future. Maddox stopped at the top of a rise that overlooked the rolling prairie, and Helena saw what he had been working on. A house stood there, brand new and gleaming in the morning sun. Not large, just 4 rooms, but beautifully built with a wide porch and windows that would catch the light. It was set among a grove of cottonwoods with a creek running nearby, and it was the most beautiful thing Helena had ever seen. "I know our house is fine," Maddox said, dismounting and helping her down, "but I wanted to build you something that was just ours. A place we could go when the ranch gets too busy, when we need quiet. I have been working on it for 2 years with help from the hands." Helena walked through the rooms, touching the smooth wood walls, looking out windows that framed views of endless sky and grass. There was a bedroom with a big iron bed, a kitchen with a new stove, a sitting room with shelves already waiting for books. It was perfect, exactly what she would have designed if she had known how to put dreams into words. "You like it?" Maddox asked, and there was actual nervousness in his voice. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "I love it, I love you, I cannot believe you did this. I would do anything for you." He pulled her close. "You know that by now, do not you?" "I do." She kissed him deeply. "I really do." They christened the house that afternoon, making love in the big bed while sunlight poured through the windows and the cottonwoods rustled outside. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about nothing and everything, and Helena thought about how lucky she was, how blessed beyond measure. The years continued their swift passage. William married a rancher's daughter named Alice and brought her to live on the Double H, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Maddox stepped back. Margaret went to teacher's college in Topeka, coming home each summer full of ideas and stories. The ranch became a small empire, providing work for a dozen families and beef for markets as far away as Chicago. Helena's hair started to show silver threads, and Maddox developed lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to each other, they were unchanging. They still took long rides across the prairie, still sat up late talking by the fire, still found reasons to sneak away to their little house among the cottonwoods. On a summer evening in 1895, when Helena was 40 and Maddox was 44, they sat on the porch of that little house and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. William and Alice had just announced they were expecting their first child, and Margaret had written to say she had been offered a teaching position in Concordia. "We are going to be grandparents," Helena said, still marveling at the idea. "When did we get old enough for that? We are not old." "We are seasoned," Maddox grinned at her, "distinguished, weathered, well-loved." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "And we are going to be the best grandparents those babies ever had. Babies plural. Alice is only having one, for now, but you know William. He will want a house full, same as his mother did." Maddox pulled her close. "Can you imagine? This ranch filled with another generation, our grandchildren running through these fields the way our children did." Helena could imagine it, could see it so clearly it was almost a vision. The legacy they were building was not just land and cattle, but family. Love passed down and multiplied. She thought about the girl she had been, convinced she would live and die behind that counter in the general store, invisible and alone. That girl could never have imagined this abundance, this richness of life and love. "What are you thinking about?" Maddox asked, reading her silence accurately as he always did. "About the day you walked into the store. About how different my life would be if you had waited until morning to buy your supplies. No different. I would have found you eventually." He said it with such certainty. "I was meant to find you, Helena. I believe that with everything in me." "You really think so?" "That we were meant for each other. I know so." He turned her face toward his. "You are my home. You always have been from that first day. Everything good in my life flows from you." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, and afterward, Helena lay in his arms and counted her blessings like rosary beads. A husband who cherished her, children who were thriving, a home that was solid and real, a future bright with promise. The grandchildren came, first William and Alice's son Joseph, then their daughter Ruth, then Margaret's children after she married the new doctor in Concordia. The ranch house filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of family gatherings. Helena spent her days teaching grandchildren their letters, baking bread, working in her enormous garden, and loving every minute of it. Maddox gradually handed over the ranch operations entirely to William, though he still spent his mornings riding the fence lines and checking on the cattle. It was not work anymore, more like visiting old friends. His hands ached sometimes in the cold, and his back was not what it used to be, but he was healthy and strong and grateful for every day. They celebrated their 25th anniversary with a party even bigger than Helena's 30th birthday had been. The ranch could barely hold all the people who came to honor them, friends and family and business associates from across the state. There were speeches and toasts and a cake so large it required 2 people to carry it. "A quarter century," said John Henderson, whose land they had bought all those years ago. And they still look at each other like newlyweds. It was true. The passion between Helena and Maddox had never dimmed, just evolved into something deeper and more sustainable. They still reached for each other in the night, still found reasons to steal kisses when they thought no one was watching, still fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Thomas came to the anniversary party with Sarah and their grown children, and he pulled Helena aside during the dancing. He was 60 now, his hair gone gray, but his eyes were clear and his handshake was steady. "I am proud of you, sister," he said, "for building all this, for making something good out of the nothing we started with." "We both made something," Helena said gently. "Your children are wonderful, Thomas. Sarah is a good woman. You have done well. Not as well as you, but I am content." He looked around at the party, at the ranch spread out under the stars. "Our father would be pleased, I think, to see what you became. Maybe." Helena had made her peace with her father's memory years ago, forgiving him for the burden he had left her while honoring the values he had tried to instill. "I hope so." The party wound down eventually, and Helena and Maddox escaped to their Cottonwood house, leaving the celebration to the younger generation. They sat on the porch in the comfortable silence of people who did not need to fill every moment with words. 25 years, Helena said finally. "It feels like both forever and yesterday. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Maddox pulled her close. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it as long as it led me to you, even the hard parts." She was thinking of those first years, the struggle to build the ranch, the lean winters and the times they went to bed hungry so their children could eat. Especially the hard parts. They proved what we were made of. He kissed her temple. They proved we could weather anything as long as we had each other. More years passed, swift as river current. Helena's hair went completely silver, and Maddox moved a little slower, but they were healthy and active and deeply engaged with life. They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own, adding another generation to the legacy. The Double H Ranch became one of the most respected operations in Kansas, known for quality beef and fair dealing. Helena started writing down the family stories, wanting to preserve them for the great-grandchildren who were beginning to arrive. She wrote about the general store and the cowboy who walked in one dusty evening. She wrote about the hard years and the good ones, about love that grew like prairie grass, tough and resilient and beautiful in its way. Maddox would sit with her while she wrote, reading over her shoulder and adding details she had forgotten. Sometimes they would laugh at old memories, and sometimes they would sit in quiet wonder at how far they had come. On Helena's 60th birthday, Maddox gave her a leather-bound journal filled with blank pages. "For your stories," he said, "so the children will know where they came from." She filled that journal, and then another and another, the stories pouring out like water from a spring. She wrote about being overlooked and underestimated, about finding worth in herself before anyone else could see it. She wrote about Maddox and the steady, patient way he had loved her into believing she deserved to be loved. She wrote it all down so that no one who came after would ever feel as invisible as she once had. They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just the two of them in the Cottonwood house. They were in their 60s now, slowed by age but not defeated by it. They spent the day reminiscing and reading old letters they had written to each other over the years, marveling at the consistency of their devotion. "I have loved you every day for 40 years, Maddox said as they watched the sunset from their porch. "And I will love you every day I have left." "And I you." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting against him the way she had 10,000 times before. "You made my life worth living, Maddox. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, and that changed everything. You were never invisible to me." He kissed the top of her head. "You blazed like the sun from the first moment I saw you." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast Kansas sky. The ranch spread out around them, full of the sounds of evening, cattle lowing and horses nickering, and the distant laughter of family gathered at the main house. Helena thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that dusty general store to this porch, from loneliness to abundance, from being overlooked to being cherished. It had not been an easy path, but it had been worth every step. Years continued to unfold, each one precious and measured. Helena and Maddox grew old together with grace, their love a constant in a changing world. They saw the new century arrive in 1900, marveling that they had lived to see such a milestone. They saw automobiles come to Concordia and electricity reach the ranch. They saw their grandchildren have children who had children, until the family tree spread out like the cottonwoods that shaded their little house. On a spring morning in 1910, when Helena was 75 and Maddox was 79, they took one last ride across the ranch together. Maddox was slower now, his movements careful, but he still sat a horse with the ease of a lifetime spent in the saddle. They rode to the original section of land they had bought all those years ago, where the first cabin still stood, weathered but solid. "Remember building this?" Maddox asked, dismounting with careful movements and helping Helena down. "I remember thinking it was a palace after that tent." She walked around the cabin, touching the logs Maddox had notched and fitted with his own hands. "I remember being so happy I thought my heart would burst. You gave me that, happiness, purpose, a reason to build something lasting." He pulled her into his arms, and even after all these years, even with age slowing them both, the embrace felt like coming home. "I was drifting before you, Helena. Just moving from place to place with no real direction. You gave me a place to land. We gave each other that." She touched his weathered face, tracing the lines that time and sun had carved there. "We built it together." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in front of the cabin where their life together had truly begun. And Helena felt a peace so profound, it was almost like prayer. Maddox passed away quietly in his sleep 2 years later, his hand still holding Helena's the way it had held hers for more than 50 years. She grieved deeply, but without regret, knowing they had used their time well, that nothing had been left unsaid or undone. His funeral brought people from across the state, testament to the impact he had made. But Helena knew the real measure of his life was in the family he had created and the woman he had loved so completely. She lived another 5 years, spending her days surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of the love she and Maddox had built. She finished her journals, writing down every story she could remember, making sure the legacy was preserved. She worked in her garden and taught reading to the youngest great-grandchildren and sat on the porch of the Cottonwood house, remembering. On a soft evening in June of 1917, Helena died peacefully in her sleep, her journals stacked neatly on the bedside table, her life complete and fully lived. They buried her next to Maddox on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that had been planted the year they married. The Double H Ranch continued for generations, passed down through William's line, and then to his children and grandchildren. The journals Helena had written became treasured family heirlooms. Read and reread. The story of the overlooked woman and the cowboy who saw her becoming legend. Her great-great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch and watch the same sunsets, standing on the foundation of love and determination that Helena and Maddox had built all those years ago. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light hit just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the Cottonwood house, hands linked, watching the sun sink below the endless Kansas horizon. Whether it was memory or something more did not really matter. What mattered was the story they had written together. A story of seeing and being seen, of love that transformed and endured, of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to become, who they were meant to be. The town of Concordia grew and changed. The general store where it all began eventually torn down to make way for progress. But the ranch remained, solid and enduring. The Cottonwood house stood for more than 100 years, carefully maintained by each generation, a shrine to the love that had started there. The journals were eventually published, Helena's clear, honest voice speaking across the decades, telling the story of a woman who had been invisible until the right man looked at her and saw everything. It was a story about being overlooked and underestimated, about the quiet strength it takes to keep going when the world does not see your worth. But more than that, it was a story about love in its truest form, patient and kind and transformative, the kind of love that builds ranches and raises children and lasts beyond death itself. It was the story of Helena Zimmerman, who became Helena Hayes, and Maddox Hayes, who walked into a general store one dusty evening and found the rest of his life waiting behind the counter. Their descendants multiplied and spread across the country, but they always came back to the ranch for reunions, drawn by the powerful legacy of those two people who had started with nothing and built an empire of love. They walked the land that Helena and Maddox had worked, stood in the cabin they had built with their own hands, and read the journals that preserved their voices and their story. And in those journals, in Helena's careful handwriting, were the words that became the family motto, written on the first page in bold letters. You are never invisible to someone who truly sees you, and when you find that person, hold on with both hands and build something that lasts. Helena and Maddox had done exactly that, taking the nothing they started with and transforming it into everything that mattered, proving that the greatest legacy is not land or money or status, but love freely given and fully received, multiplying across generations like ripples in an endless pond. Their story became the foundation on which their family built their lives, a reminder that being overlooked by most people did not matter as long as you were cherished by the right one. And that true love, the kind that sees and values and transforms, was worth waiting for and fighting for and building a whole life around. The ranch still stands today, passed down now to the sixth generation, and the Cottonwood house is still there, weathered but solid, a monument to two people who refused to let difficult beginnings define their ending.